Sponsored in part by Pediatric Associates of Dallas. Pediatric Associates of Dallas has been providing excellence in pediatric medicine since 1971. PAD has locations in Dallas and Plano and is now open 7 days a week because taking care of kids is what we do.
The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional legal advice, medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your attorney, advocate, physician, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding any medical or educational concerns.
Welcome to Empower Dyslexia podcast and show. I'm Rachel Chambers.
And I'm Stephen Yearout.
We're here to help you be better partners in education. On the show, we talk to experts in the field. We discuss, dyslexia and related disorders and talk to experts in the field. We discuss policy at the state and federal level. And we also talk to people that have personal experiences with dyslexia and what it's like. I guess like us on Facebook. And I mean, that would be really helpful. And also on YouTube, we get the more people that we get to like and subscribe to our channel, the
helps
better.
Us with our sponsors.
It helps us with our sponsors, and we need sponsors. So if you want to sponsor us, please instant message us.
Reach out.
Yeah.
So make sure you subscribe and like us on Facebook and subscribe to us and hit the
like button, follow button,
bell thing on YouTube so you know when we put out new shows.
Yeah. And we're here live every Thursday at 11 Central Time. So so for all your viewing and needs, information.
Right. As always, we always talk about where you can hear us. I mean, obviously, if you're watching this, it's Facebook Live and YouTube Live. But if you enjoy listening to podcasts in your car, you can get it on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, AnyPod, Stitcher, TuneIn, Alexa. All of our great audio apps.
Yeah.
For podcasts.
For sure. Okay, so some housekeeping that Stephen and I are kind of excited about. The state of Texas, they had two House bills, big House bills that passed this legislative session. It was House Bill 3 and House Bill 3906. And according to those two House bills, those two House bills created 5 additional advisory committees. And as you guys know, I'm on one, which is called the Special Education Continuing Advisory Committee. And we meet quarterly or even more often than that. When we were going through the corrective action plan for trying to get over the 8.5 cap, we met at least once a month and discussed all that stuff. Hopefully they're rolling it out now. I don't really know of any big updates as far as that. My next meeting with them is mid-September, so maybe I can bring back some information to share with you after that. They are open meetings, meaning that anybody can go. Reporters, journalists, parents, anybody can go, and you can even testify. There's like what you would do at a school board meeting. You have 3 minutes if you want to bring up a subject for us to discuss or even to think about or deliberate on, like a stance on, if we take a stance on something, you can go and talk to us.
We as the general public we need to go and give our recommendations, give our viewpoint. Otherwise
we don't know.
The people that we're just basically saying, hey, you go ahead and do whatever you want to do, and we get no input, and we have to live with whatever these changes are. We've been fighting for school finance reform for a long time.
Long time.
And, House Bill 3,
It's 30 years
that's kind of
overdue.
what that piece of it does. And there's a lot of it in there. But anyway, they put these two, these two bills have advisory committees, and you and I were nominated to be on those advisory committees.
Yeah, Stephen was nominated to be on the Reading Standards K through 3 Advisory Committee. So that committee, in a nutshell, is basically going to go over any kind of reading curriculum, and kind of see which one is best suited for our Texas students, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
So,
That's how I
and
understand it.
including dyslexics.
Right.
The dyslexics were on that, what does it say? So it's going to be comprised of 20 to 25 members appointed by the commissioner. So Stephen, Mike Morath, Stephen really needs to be on this committee because I think he would be excellent choice for it. So although he's nominated, he has to be appointed, as do I.
We went to the same high school there, Mike Morath.
Yeah, in Garland. Woo woo.
Go Owls.
So this committee, they're going to give academic and or practical expertise in one or more of the following areas: childhood education, developmental literacy, bilateral literacy, English learners, dyslexia, or special education. So I think you would fit perfectly in that committee, and I hope you get it. We'll find out
I'd fit right in the dyslexia part, right?
for sure, no doubt. And then I was nominated to be on the Special Education Allotment Advisory Committee, and that one, these are just 2 of the 5. That one's going to meet once a month starting in September, I believe, and we have to create a new weight system, or however you want to whatever you want to call it, for special education.
It's basically the amount of money that a school district receives per child that receives services in special education. So,
And that one, we have to make a report by May to give to the legislature, and saying this is what we feel is the best way to pay for special education. No longer the weights that are there now are so old and don't work.
right.
So anyways, I don't know if I'll get it. Again, it has to be an appointment by Mike Morath. And, their requirement was to have one person from the Special Education Continuing Advisory Committee be on that committee as well. And so I meet that criteria, but I don't know, maybe they've chosen somebody else.
Well, we'll let you know whenever that comes out.
Yeah, yep. So, yeah, you were going to say something else.
I was going to just make a quick announcement about a few shows back, or a show I think it was 18. I challenged Dr. Tim Conway.
That's right.
And his Now Foundations program about to put me through the program and do remediation on me. At 45 years old, never been remediated. So I have started that process. I'm 2 weeks in, and I'll be doing video updates and just, telling how I'm feeling about the program, what I'm learning, what kind of changes I'm seeing.
How many hours are you doing right now? Per day?
I'm just doing one.
One session a day.
There's a lot of people that do anywhere from 1 to
6 hours.
I've heard Dr. Conway talk about people doing 5 to 6 hours, or 5 hours a day.
That's a lot.
But most of those people go to his clinics, and they're doing not only the Now Foundations, but they're doing OT, PT, whatever else, what other services that they need too.
Gotcha.
I'm also going to have Dr. Conway come on and kind of talk about, in my updates, I'll have him kind of talk about what changes are taking place in the brain in those sections of the program, which
that's going to be so cool.
Just a little teaser, I can tell you, although I've only been doing it for 2 weeks for an hour a day, I can already see a huge difference.
That's awesome.
It's
can you verbalize what you
I don't want to give it away yet.
Oh, okay. So
Just tune in. It's you know, it's crazy. It really
Yay!
is.
Okay, well, I'm excited.
I can't believe that that something like this can make that much of a difference.
Well, good. I'm like so excited, almost to tears. So I'm excited that you're going through getting an intervention finally, and I'm excited that you're excited, and so can't wait to see how this plays out.
So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
On to our show.
On to our
Yes.
show. So today we have a really great guest, and I have known her I was introduced to her. I think we met briefly in, when did we go down to Austin?
It was
February?
last February
For the dyslexia conference.
yes.
Decoding Dyslexia, I
Right.
think, put it on. Anyways, Virginia was there. Her name is Virginia Spencer, and I'm going to give you like a little quick bio on Virginia. She is the principal of Lumen Advocacy, LLC, a special education and parent advocate with experience in Kansas, Illinois, and Texas. And she currently lives here in Texas, in Austin, I believe. She represents students in 19 school districts in 3 regions and is familiar with the challenges of securing appropriate school services under IDEA, which is special education. She has a background in parent training for ARD meetings, negotiating different curriculums that students may need, and is a non-attorney representation at dispute resolution. So she can do dispute resolution, but not in an attorney way because she's not a lawyer. Additionally, she provides presentations to groups or organizations such as the IDA Austin, as well as in-service training to private related service providers, and is a certified NAMI presenter for the Parents and Teachers as Allies program. So Virginia Spencer, welcome to the show. We're so glad you could join us today.
Thanks for having me on, Rachel and Stephen.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what made you want to be a parent advocate.
So the short story is that I'm a parent of 3 adult children, and all of them have impairments. And my middle son was identified as having a speech impairment at the age of 3. And he was subsequently identified as having autism. That was 17 years ago. So it's been a long journey. But one of the pivotal things that made me want to be a special education advocate was my oldest son had a 504 plan. And he was transferring into high school. And his 504 team said he's not fit to do honors classes. And I said, well, why? He qualifies. His grades are good enough. He did well on the state assessments. And they said to me, well, you know, he has ADHD. And I said, well, that doesn't sound right. So I decided to consult with a special education attorney. And that's when things turned around for me because he gave me resources. His name was Charles Fox. He's in the Chicago area of Illinois. And he said, I want you to go on this website called Rights Law. So literally overnight, I started to educate myself about special education law, what was happening in the country, all kinds of issues, and realized that perhaps keeping my son out of honors classes was a discrimination issue. So that was a big pivotal point. At that point, I was a gifted advocate. I was helping the local school district differentiate instruction for gifted children. I helped with placement appeal for gifted education by using Northwestern University's gifted program and assessment. So what actually happened was my son on the spectrum started to not regress, but he started to flatline in terms of his reading and writing. And so we started to have more intense conversations about his planning. He had an IEP. And then the school district asked me if I'd participate in parent training. There was a parent training program. It was called Parent Educator Partnership, and the State Board of Education oversaw this program. So basically, they trained parents to help other parents write IEP goals. So that was really my journey. I came to Texas and I looked for a program like that. I wanted to volunteer and help parents. And I came across Partners Resource Network, and they are the agency that disseminates information about parental rights. And they said to me, well, we don't need someone to do that. We need a regional coordinator. So I became the regional coordinator for Region 13. And it was tough because I had hundreds of people calling me, and I was one person covering the entire region. And one of the things that struck me was that we were disseminating information, which was really helpful, but we weren't able to go watch parents actually advocate in meetings. And so I decided to leave Partners Resource Network and privately become an advocate, so I could go in there and watch parents learn how to advocate on their own. And so that's where I am at right now, is trying to get parents to do this, hopefully without my help.
Well, that's kind of how this show came about too, is making sure that we can bring the experts the most relevant information and allow these parents to go in and tell their story and advocate for their children to the best of their ability, and because they know their kid best.
Yeah.
So.
And it is
Right.
definitely a process. It's not like,
Oh, it's
oh,
work.
your child has
Yeah.
this and we're going to do this. It's like your child has this, and
Well, I mean, there's
it depends on the school district.
right, but
And
you-
who's in the meeting.
You definitely have to know what, whys, and hows as a parent. It's work on your end too. You have to educate yourself and make sure that you have the most, like we always say, the most relevant information to make sure that your child gets the best help that they can get.
And to do that effectively, I would say that it's probably at least a part-time, if not full-time
It's a-
job while you're going through the throes. Wouldn't you agree, Virginia?
Absolutely, and it's tough
It's
because
time-consuming and stressful
Yeah.
and emotional. It's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost 2 full-time jobs on top of your full-time job.
Man.
So,
Right.
So that's why we love to have people like you on the show, just to enlighten us and give us a little bit of information of what your experience have been, and then also, all of your expertise. You've been doing this for a while. So I know when we talked on the phone a few days ago, we talked about speech and language impairments and dyslexia. Can you give us a little bit more information in regards to that?
Well, so I was a presenter at the IDA, as you mentioned, about a year ago, so 2018. And we had a presenter, and we need to check this, but we think it was Jamie Putnam who presented, and she's a speech language pathologist. And she mentioned that speech impairments are language is global. And one of the things that struck me in this presentation was that she mentioned that a speech impairment and dyslexia are comorbid. And when we say comorbid, what we mean is that they occur together. And the statistic that was put out was 40% comorbidity. So to me as an advocate, that's an important takeaway, because not only are we looking at children who have classic dyslexia and meet that definition and have a specific learning disability perhaps, but we're also looking at other areas of disability such as autism. So when I get a client who is perhaps on the spectrum and has a speech impairment, I look at the evaluations to see, have we actually ruled out dyslexia? Because there's a strong possibility that dyslexia is in there and it's masked by the other considerations, right? Because kids on the spectrum have behavioral issues, that speech impairment sometimes impacts their IQ. So the school is thinking, this kid doesn't have an average IQ, therefore we're not really looking at dyslexia. So I like to see those evaluations done. I'd like a rule out to see whether these children that have been identified under autism, or they may have been identified as intellectually disabled with other disability under another diagnosis or category, but I want to rule out for that, because if we can establish that there is a dyslexic profile in there, then we can address it with appropriate instruction. So that is one of the things that I do. And in fact, I have gotten some children locally identified as dyslexic that are on the autism spectrum, where they previously just had an IEP for autism and speech. And I've asked the school, can we do some of the standard screenings for autism, like the comprehensive test of phonological processing, or the test of whatever it is, pragmatic language, and looking at those pieces together, can we put them in a dyslexia program and write some goals that determine if that program will work for them? So, I've got some kids into programs where you wouldn't typically see kids on the spectrum. They'd be kids with learning disabilities. So that was very eye-opening for me, and it was a good piece of information.
So basically, the dyslexia intervention works not only for people with dyslexia or some kind of reading issue that's like, I want to say only dyslexia. It can work for other, like, as you said, autistic people.
I think you caveat that with the correct program.
Right.
So not just, hey, we're going to go pull a dyslexia program off the shelf and we're going to, give it to a child with autism. So we want to make sure that it's the correct, highly tested, research-based, evidence-based, with high gains. I mean, those are the things that we want to make sure that we do is provide the best remediation for these children, not just whatever's on the shelf.
Well, that's a good point, Stephen, because, sometimes the kids who are on the spectrum, they actually have the basic reading skills. So perhaps they can decode, but then they fall down at the sentence level, the word level, and that's when you start to see the breakdown in that literacy continuum. So you're right. I mean, a program like Take Flight, if you're on book 1 and you're looking at phonemic awareness, that probably isn't going to be appropriate because that's a skill they already have. And so it's really important under an IEP to make sure that we are identifying the right interventions, the right evidence-based instruction for those deficit skills.
Well, and then meeting them where they are.
Right.
Like if they can already decode, they don't necessarily need to go, like what you said, go through that part of the program. But if they're having problems with, comprehension or...
Well, I mean, if you really think about that, though, that kills the fidelity in the program. You really have to go through the program the way the program is designed with fidelity. Now, they may move through that section faster.
Pretty fast, yeah.
But you need to make sure that there's not something that child is missing.
Right. It's building blocks.
It's building blocks, right? You have to have the foundation.
Yeah.
You were talking about speech and dyslexia. My oldest son had 6 months of speech before he ever went to elementary school, to kindergarten. And he was the one that was late identified. And I believe going through that speech therapy, I truly believe going through that speech therapy, number one, helped him compensate, and it definitely masked the dyslexia a lot more until the workload became too much, and then he wasn't able to compensate for it. So
So what you're saying is they probably should have tested not only for speech, but for possibly a reading problem, or did they?
well, I mean, at that point, he couldn't read. I mean, he was
Right.
pre-K at that point, or right at kindergarten. So
Yeah.
that's something I've seen also with other kids that have dyslexia. I've seen, I'm not saying that all kids with dyslexia have a speech problem, because that's
Right.
not true, but I've seen a lot of kids that have had speech issues along with dyslexia.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, that, I mean, the 40%, I mean,
Yeah.
Is that an accurate statistic? The 40%, like 40% of dyslexics also have a speech impairment, or am I getting that wrong?
I don't know that it's that way round. I think the IDA can probably clarify that presentation that took place last year, but the way it was stated was that it was, if you have a speech impairment, 40% of kids with a speech impairment have dyslexia as well.
Okay. Okay.
it's
That's
like,
how it
Yeah.
was.
it's like the, whatever it is, 70 or 80% of the kids that have dyslexia also
have ADHD.
I mean,
It's that blows my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was such a prevalent
I didn't understand
comorbidity.
it was that high either, but
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to ask, so we talked about this also, Virginia. Per the research of No Child Left Behind, you had mentioned, 91% per their research, 91% of children can learn on grade level. For example, Down syndrome child, you said that they did an RLI intervention, which I'm not familiar with that intervention, but after that child did that intervention, they now can read.
Right. So the Down syndrome organization actually, there's been a lot of research. There's a lady called Sue Buckley, and she and a number of other researchers put a reading intervention together for kids with Down syndrome. And it's called the Reading and Language Intervention for Children with Down syndrome. And it's evidence-based. And they've done some longitudinal studies where this program's been implemented. And 10 to 20% of children with Down syndrome can read at grade level. And so to me as an advocate, this is very important, because one of the things that we hear in the schools is that children with intellectual disabilities that have those low cognitive skills, below average, well below average, cannot learn. We're actually hearing the statements that we really can't expect them to learn, let alone learn at grade level. And what we have is this body of evidence and these interventions that show that a reasonable chunk of children can. Now, when you couple this with No Child Left Behind, No Child Left Behind states that 9% of students can't learn at grade level, but they can still learn. They can still move towards closing that gap. Mm-hmm. So, these are things that come up in odd meetings frequently. And, I say to the schools, have you heard about this program? Because there's evidence that it works. Are you willing to try it? I also have clients that have tried Linda Bell. Their children don't have Down syndrome, but they have those low IQs and they have chromosome deletion diagnoses. And they've had success with some of the dyslexia interventions like Linda Bell, and they've been able to provide data showing the benefit of those programs, those particular types of interventions. So those are very important things to share with the school, so they are aware that there are interventions out there that are successful.
Well, we as parents need, our ask is that the school really take a position of listening to the parent when they bring, this type of information in, because if the parent isn't going out there researching all this stuff, obviously they've done their homework and they're going to bring it in and say, hey, look, I think this really fits my child well, and we need to take a look at using something like this, and be more open to the suggestions that are brought in. Not to say that schools don't, but that partnering in education really needs to be a partner in education. We have to listen to their expertise, and the same thing when we bring in information like this, please listen to us.
Right.
Because our ultimate goal is the same thing, is to make sure that our child, our student, is educated and can have as normal of a life as possible.
After school.
Yeah.
Be a productive citizen in the world and pay taxes, and that's what we hope. We hope our children fly.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure the
Right.
teachers in schools, they want to see their students fly.
I've said this before. I've
They do.
never, and I'm sure there's probably one or two out there, but I've never met a teacher that has come to work every day that is like, man, I can't wait to fail this kid.
I know.
Right? They want these kids to be successful. They go into this for a love of teaching and wanting to help others and watching people grow. So let's all get together and help each other and make sure that all kids get what they need.
Yeah.
Because like you said,
And,
you were
and
talking
break
about
down the blocks, break down the blocks, the wall, that prevents that from happening,
Well-
that process from happening. Like somehow,
that statistic
work together.
that we just talked about, the 91% from no Child Left Behind, 91% of the students can learn at grade level. Well, if that's the case, why do we have such a low reading?
Yeah, we only have 30%
Literacy
that
rate.
can read by
Yeah.
third grade. Come
So-
on.
Let's
Are we
do something
really-
different, because this ain't working.
Yeah. If No Child Left Behind under President George W. Bush, back in 2002 or 4, whenever this came out, I mean, if they wanted at least 91 students to read at grade level, and we're right now where we're sitting is at 30 in his home state of Texas,
Look,
that's a disgrace. That's disgraceful.
I don't care if it's Santa Claus that puts the law in place. I want the kids to be able to get the most out of being in school 8 hours a day. I'm not sending my kids to school for a daycare center. I want them to learn and be ready for the world, because the world's going to chew you up when
So
you
that's
get
why I
out
hope
there,
you
right?
get on that committee.
So let's make sure that sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox here. Let's make sure that we get the proper tools in the toolbox for our teachers, so we can make sure that these students are successful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, bring her up to the next question or topic.
All right. So we were talking, and we've talked on the show quite a bit about the difference between 504 and IDEA or an RSPED. And you had mentioned that under 504 that, a couple of the biggest distinctions between the two. One, by federal law, the parent doesn't have to be involved, or the parent can be left out of the decision-making process inside of the 504 committee. They don't have to be a part of that. The school doesn't have to, by law, allow you to be a part of that committee. And under IDEA, special education, you have a seat at the table, correct?
Absolutely.
So I'll say that with a caveat, right? So federal law says this, right? So federal law trumps state law, trumps local law, right? So it's state law. The state law can't take away, but can add to, right? Where Texas hasn't added to it, but what they do, and I've got a couple of examples and resources that we can look at, is best practices.
Yes.
Right. So the Dyslexia Handbook, page 24, 504 section 504 does not require written notice. However, best practice is to provide parent with an explanation or of a reason for an evaluation denial, or if there's a meeting coming up, they're supposed to, best practice, they're supposed to send a letter and give the parent an opportunity to be a part of the 504 committee. Best practice is, and this is from TEA, best practice is to involve the parent as much as the parent wants to be involved. So I've got the Dyslexia State Handbook, or Texas Dyslexia Handbook, the new revision. There's also Parent and Educator Resource Guide, Section 504 in public elementary and secondary schools. There's quite a few references there. And then understood.org obviously is a really good place to look at it. And then under that, it's Understanding a 504 Plan. So I said all that to say, I just want to make sure that people understand that, yes, that's federal law, that they don't necessarily have to involve you. But if you as a parent are going through this with your school district, especially here in Texas, this is something that needs to be brought up for some training, because best practice from TEA, best practice is to make sure that you as a parent has a seat at the table.
So, going back to what you were saying, Stephen, about teachers wanting to help kids and help students succeed, typically schools want parents at that 504 meeting. They want to talk about what appropriate accommodations would be. The problem really becomes when you disagree.
Right.
Because, and I'm going to give parents some homework here. I'd like everyone to Google 34 CFR Part 104, Subpart D, because those are the regs for K through 12, Section 504. And when you actually read the procedural safeguards in Section 504 is actually only 5 lines long, so it's really open to interpretation. And I think, as you say, TEA has these best practices pieces that are in the Dyslexia Handbook. The problem becomes if you disagree, because you actually legally don't have a say in what those accommodations look like, because it's a top-down plan. And so one thing that I would say as a parent who's actually gone to a 504 hearing, which is an impartial administrative hearing that the school puts on, it's not a TEA hearing.
Right.
It's not a TEA hearing officer.
Right.
So an impartial hearing officer under 504 actually just means, that hearing officer is not an employee of the school, is not a relative. And so the school can choose the hearing officer. And I'm sure we can all imagine what the issues might be with the school choosing the hearing officer when they are disagreeing with you over what your child's accommodation should be. Mm-hmm. So then the recourse that a parent has is an appeal to district court. So if you disagree with the hearing outcome, then you're looking at civil action.
Well, there's civil actions and then OCR complaints also.
There
Which,
are, yeah.
And I completely agree that the protections under IDEA, special education, are far more protective of the student and of the parent. But again, I think that there's a couple of things that I've thought about this for a little bit. So there's a couple of things that I've come up with. So, here in Texas, so since federal law trumps state law, but state law can add to it, one of the things I think we should start asking our legislators to do is, if our child's under 504, if we're not going to put dyslexia under special education, if our child is under 504, you need to give us the same protections as IDEA. Don't say it's best practice. If it's best practice, go ahead and make it law. Let's put some teeth in it so we make sure that we're protected just like anybody else.
Well, so as an advocate, I just want to touch on something. You know, if I go into a meeting where a child has dyslexia and a 504 plan, and I see an accommodation, so this happened as recently as yesterday. So I look at the accommodations, and the top accommodation is that the child will be exempt from being graded for their spelling. And to me, that's a huge red flag, because if you're exempting a child from TEKS objectives and their objectives for spelling K through 5 in the state of Texas, then you start to think, well, if you're modifying the curriculum, that falls under special education. The definition of specially designed instruction to meet unique needs is modifying the curriculum and/or modifying an instruction. So to me, that says this kid is not 504. I want an F. This child needs a full individual evaluation under IDEA.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a
yeah.
question on that. So you talked about modification because the child's not necessarily graded on spelling, not taking off for spelling, or are you talking about not taking a spelling test?
Well, I'm talking about being not penalized for not being able to spell. And that is not, you're actually modifying the curriculum if you do that. I mean, if learning to spell and being able to spell proficiently by 5th grade is in the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills thread, then the school is actually modifying curriculum.
I can see what you're saying there.
Yeah.
But
do you see the issue there?
Right. But in
Yeah.
the same breath, though, a lot of the dyslexia programs that are out there don't really address the spelling aspect of it at that high level. I mean, my kids have not taking off for spelling because they're still horrible spellers. So is it the school's fault for not, making sure that they were given a program that addressed those needs also? Or
Well,
are you going to, and I understand the modification, I see what you're saying there. So
the issue is that a dyslexia program under IDEA might be considered a one-size-fits-all program, which is
Right.
problematic.
I was seeing that.
If I have a child who has an IEP, they're dyslexic, and they have, say, a specific learning disability and basic reading skills, they're going to have a layered approach. They're going to have some type of dyslexia intervention. They're probably going to have explicit instruction with a special education teacher. So there are going to be those layers of intervention, and there should be a goal for spelling. If you have a spelling deficit, they should be measuring whether that skill is improving with a goal. So this is why IDEA is so important. It's so important that these kids have an IEP, because these things can be missed. And then when the kids get to the later grades, they, like you said, your son was a compensator. My daughter was a compensator. If we don't have eyes on these very specific deficits within literacy skills, then under 504, they can get lost, because there's no mandate under 504 to look at the unique needs of the child. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Well, Dr. Kelly, when she came on, even in Austin, she talked about if your dyslexia intervention program does not address spelling, you're only remediating half a child.
And she's
Yeah.
big on spelling.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, you have to know how to spell. We can't allow the computers and the phones and everything else just to autocorrect everything, because hey, guess what? When you go to the doctor's office and you're sitting there having to fill out your paperwork, there's no autocorrect. Your pen doesn't have autocorrect.
Right? Exactly. Well, and then you've got to learn how to
Absolutely.
spell it enough so it can autocorrect the right word.
That was my
Right.
problem.
There are some words that I'm like, God, I don't even know where to begin on that one. But here we go. So let me ask you this. So say the kid is under special education, they have their IEP, they've done their full individual evaluation, they're under special ed, they have their IEP, they've done their first ARD, they go to their first ARD and the parents disagree with the full individual evaluation. When is it time to ask for an IEE, what does that stand for again? Outside evaluation?
Independent
Independent.
education evaluation.
Thank you. I drew a blank.
Okay, I'm very glad that you brought that up because, so, the time to ask is immediately.
Okay.
Because, you have an evaluation that, as a parent, you feel cannot be foundational for an IEP. Now, asking for an IE for an evaluation and giving consent for services and placement in special education are not mutually exclusive. And if you look at the notice of procedural safeguards on page 6, I believe it is, they're both mentioned in separate paragraphs. So some schools will turn around and say, well, if you're disagreeing with our evaluation, you're disagreeing with eligibility, and that is not correct. You're just disagreeing. You can say, I agree with eligibility. I'm just saying I don't like your evaluation and I have the right to a second opinion at your expense. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of schools don't know this and they get stuck and they say, well, I'm sorry, your child has to go back on 504. That is not acceptable. Mm. What you do at that point is you move to a non-consensus IEP, an IEP that you're not in agreement with, while the IE is being done. Now, what I say to parents is, if I'm not in the room with you and you're in there and this happens and they say, okay, your kid is not getting SPED now because you don't like our initial evaluation, I say, well, if you have a child in special education and they get that 3-year evaluation, do you kick them out if the parent says they don't like the reevaluation? No, of course you don't. You don't kick them out.
You keep on what they're doing.
Exactly.
While waiting for the IEE, which that's not going to take as long as getting an FIE, in my experience. When I go and hire someone to do it, they do it within 3 weeks, and it's done. And with my school district, Dallas, I put in the notice in April. We had a meeting in May. They called me in end of June. We did the first part of the evaluation the end of July. We did the second part last weekend, and we did the last part yesterday. So from April to August, that's how long it took in Dallas.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was complete. I mean, I asked for a full evaluation and what tests they were going to be doing, and they didn't really tell me until after the fact. So I'll see at my ARD meeting what all they actually did.
Right. Well, here's the thing to know about an IE. I mean, so always try and get the school to agree to and put it in their contract that IE evaluator shows up for that ARD meeting where they're considering that second opinion, because you don't want to be in that expert role.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So there was one, the slide that you wanted to mention.
Oh, the Hasbrook-Tyndall table?
We're just about out of time, so if we could, I want to use that. I want to talk about that slide, but just real quick, and then we'll put it on our website and put it on our Facebook page also, so people can see it.
Can you briefly go through this? I don't know if you're seeing it, but we have it up.
I'm not seeing it, but this is a very useful tool when you're writing specific skills for fluency, and it plays back into when I talked about really writing goals to the very specific deficit skills. If you have a fluency deficit, you want a cold words correct per minute goal. You want to know where that child is and where they need to be to catch up, because we're talking about gap closure. And so this is a useful tool. It's used by Region 13.
Oh, that is useful. I've never seen that. I'm going to have to, let's put that on our website.
Yeah, I'll put that on the website and put it on Facebook.
Because I think I need that now.
Yeah.
I need to see where he is. And also, you also can you go through real quick, what is the 10-day notice of private placement letter? You mentioned that on our phone conversation, then we'll have to end the show.
Okay, I'll try and break it up. So if your child you've got data that shows your child has an ineffective intervention at school. This is under IDEA, by the way, not 504. And the school will not change the instruction. You can send in a letter saying, I'm giving you notice that I'm going to be providing private services to my child because of your failure to provide FAPE. And that puts them on notice that you're going to be paying for something and possibly be coming back asking them to pay for it. So you can take that to dispute. You could take that to a mediation. It could be part of a due process complaint.
Now, is that when they need to hire a lawyer, or can they stay with an advocate at this point? What do you suggest? Or both, either or?
Well, in some cases, advocates can get this resolved in the yard meeting, and that's the best case scenario. You can go to mediation with an advocate. It depends on the school district. It depends on whether there are other issues going on. You know, I like to work with attorneys if it's a complex issue or particularly egregious. Now, the 10-day notice of private placement, that is when you have given up on the IEP, you're in total disagreement, and you say, I'm pulling my kid out, and I'm going to put them in a private school and provide services. You give them that 10-day notice to preserve your right to ask them again to pay for that private placement. And so it puts the school on notice, but there is case law regarding this where schools didn't tell the school they were unhappy. They pulled their child out, and then they tried to go back and get the school to pay for private placement. And there's some case law that says that that reimbursement is limited because they didn't give the school notice.
Right.
So everybody put it in writing. Always put it in writing, right?
Cross your T's, dot your I's.
If that's where, you know, it's going down that unfortunate path, always put it in writing. But hopefully there's not too many right now that are going through that, I hope.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. I know we skipped over a couple of questions. We'll have you back on, and, you know, there's some other topics that we need to talk about.
And I think we covered most everything, actually.
So thank you so much for coming on, your wealth of knowledge, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me on. You know, we just want to get the word out there, whether parents want to use our services or not.
Right.
Well, and I know all the lawyers in the state are really busy, are they not? And they're asking the advocates to help them with paperwork to get them.
Well, they're asking us to take on here, you know, filing for hearings. And I mean, I know you've had attorneys on, and they're doing triage.
Right. It's so
right
busy.
now.
Yeah, because our state's kind of recuperating, I guess.
So-
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today. You guys go get your kids tested, do a full evaluation as we recommend, right?
Right.
And we'll see you next time.
See you there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.